All right, welcome to all of you who are joining us today. I'm going to let everybody filter in and then get started. Welcome everyone to our San Francisco History Days Sunday afternoon programming. We are at the end of almost at the end of it all. So this is not quite our penultimate, but one of our last sessions today. So thanks for helping round out the weekend with us. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for everyone to filter in who's still signing in, and then I'll introduce the afternoon. All right, so I'll be letting people in as we go, but it looks like we have our cohort this afternoon. So welcome to everyone. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Lisa Ruth Elliott. I'm a member of the 2020 San Francisco History Days host committee, and I'll be managing this Zoom session behind the scenes. The program you're about to see is titled Monuments and Markers, Uncovering the Philippine-American War in San Francisco, presented by SOMA Pilipinas, SF Filipino Cultural Heritage District Historian MC Canlas, and Arts and Culture Administrator Rachel Lastimosa. If you're new to San Francisco History Days, this annual event is in our 10th year. We're a showcase of local history connecting you, the public, with independent historians and organizations within our diverse history community. We've had a full slate of fun and informative programs scheduled for this entire weekend. And as I mentioned, we're rounding out programs for our last day, but you can still find our exhibiting organizations' participant pages for online content. I'll put that in the chat box shortly, but please check out the website sfhistorydays.org for more information. So in order to participate fully today, just a few items before we get started. We'll be using the chat window to include the URLs and other important information the presenters want to pass on. You can also use that to put information in if you have something to add. If you have questions for MC during the program, we do ask that you type those questions into the Q&A window. It's just a little bit cleaner that way. And there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the program moderated by Rachel. And you will have heard the announcement when you came in, but please note this program is being recorded. And so now I'm going to hand it over to MC. Take it.
I'm going to actually introduce MC. Thank you so much, Lisa Ruth. My name is Rachel Lastimosa. I'm the Arts and Culture Administrator with SOMA Pilipinas, the San Francisco Filipino Cultural Heritage District. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Cultural District, we were designated by the city in 2016 and by the state of California through the California Arts Council in 2017. This designation stands on the shoulders of a 120-year-long history of Filipinos in San Francisco, particularly in SOMA. Our mission is simple, and I'll provide just a few highlights of some of the work that's being done by our broad coalition of direct service providers, residents, workers, and families and artists. So one of our mission is socioeconomic justice for the Filipino community. One example of that is us working tirelessly alongside other arts institutions through the Propi Arts Coalition to ensure funding for the arts and cultural districts through the hotel taxes. Another one of our missions is preservation and community development. SOMA Pilipinas is home to the highest density of Filipino-American neighborhood services, residents, businesses, and cultural assets, and legacy arts organizations like Kearny Street Workshop, the first ever Asian American nonprofit arts group in the nation, and Binosif Studio, which is the only Filipino-American black box theater in the country. Organizations such as South of Market Community Action Network, Bishop, Bayanihan Equity Center. They work diligently to support the needs of our residents that are facing eviction, in need of housing, direct services, equity, or after-school programming. We also worked with the Mayor's Office and Mission Housing to preserve the Grand Oriente Hotel in South Park, a property that was purchased in the 1920s by a Filipino fraternity at a time when people of color weren't even allowed to own buildings. So this historic property will continue to serve the community as affordable housing for our elders. Our last mission is visibility and cultural celebration. With approximately 400,000 Filipinos currently residing in the Greater Bay Area, the contributions of Filipinos to this region are too many to name. But Tagalog is the third most used language in California, and nearly half of the entire Filipino population in the country resides here in California. So that being said, SOMA Pilipinas has made it a priority to celebrate our culture and bring awareness to our existence. We received the National Endowment for the Arts Our Town grant for SOMA Pilipinas is in the Heart, bolstering our visibility and placemaking efforts within the district. We launched a banner campaign that features residents, workers, service providers, and youth in South of Market. We have annual activities like the Parole Festival at Jessie Square in December and the Pistahan Parade and Festival that happens every August. Currently, we're also working on a documentary with the San Francisco Urban Film Festival on the impacts of the Yerba Buena redevelopment on the Filipinx community. So that's just a little bit of the work that we're doing here. Since the colonization of the Philippines by the US in the late 1800s, migration of the Philippines to the US has been directly correlated to US immigration policies. And waves of Filipinos moved to US to support various industries and various military efforts. Today, 6,000 Filipinos leave their home daily to work abroad, with people being the #1 export of the Philippines. In SOMA Pilipinas, we strive to make sure that our community gets the support that they need in a variety of ways. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. His name is MC Canlas. He's the author of SOMA Pilipinas Studies that came out in 2000 in 2 languages. 2002. He also is the author of SOMA Pilipinas Ethno Tour Guidebook in 2013. One of the leading proponents of the Heritage District and in the Western SOMA Citizens Planning Task Force of the San Francisco Planning Department. Kuya MC is also known in the community as the person behind the Pearl Lantern Festival, Galing Bata After School Program, at Bessie Carmichael Filipino Education Center. He is the creator of our Ethno Tour and is a part of Bayanihan Community Center and is currently working with Episcopal Community Services as a bilingual problem-solving specialist, and with FADF, the Filipino American Development Foundation, as cultural specialist. He is also a member of the History Committee at SOMA Pilipinas. So welcome, Kuya MC.
Good afternoon. This is MC Canlas. I used to be the ethnotourism guide for San Francisco, especially for Filipinos. And I do mostly 2 tours. One is the SOMA Neighborhood Heritage Tour, which is a walking tour. And the other one is the Filipino-American Tour of History, which is this topic for today, which is the Monument and Markers Uncovering the Philippine-American War in San Francisco. This is a virtual tour. Actually, I prefer the actual tour because you will see the beauty of San Francisco and the feeling that you're in a city that is connected to the Philippines. So our slide, next slide. So our coverage for this are these red buttons. So there are many historical landmarks, monuments, and markers around the city that are connected to the Philippines. But if you see the dates, they're mostly installed or mounted in 1901 to 1905. Perhaps there's a reason for that, and we will uncover that. Next slide. Okay, our point of interest 1 is in the heart of San Francisco. How many of you have been to San Francisco? Perhaps you're not familiar with the Union Square, which is located on Post, Geary, Powell, and Stockton, and is the center of the expensive department stores like Macy's. And of course, with the situation now, there are very few people coming to the Union Square because of the pandemic affecting our nation, including San Francisco. But my first question, being a teacher, have you noticed the difference of the photo taken in 2005 and the photo taken in 9/26/2020? Of course, you cannot provide me the answer because we're on a Zoom setup. Perhaps we can go to the next slide. Okay, so first, the inscription on the four sides of the Dewey Tower remains the same. But you see the highlight? Two presidents, incumbent presidents of the United States, were part of the big celebration of mounting this monument. The groundbreaking by President William McKinley, and also dedicated during the installation by President Theodore Roosevelt. So it means that it's very, very significant to the nation and to San Francisco. If you see the east side, it says Secretary of Navy John Long to Commodore Dewey, April 24, 1898. War has commenced between the United States and Spain. Proceed at once to the Philippine Islands and capture or destroy the Spanish fleet. Although the Spanish-American War started in Cuba, you know, the main bombing or explosion, but the first war attack was not in Cuba. It was in the Philippines. On the night of April 13th, 1898, Commodore Dewey's squadron entered Manila Bay, and undoubted by the danger of the submerged explosive reached Manila town at dawn of May 1st, 1898, attacked and destroyed the Spanish fleet of 10 warships, reduced the fort, and held the city in subjection until the arrival of troops from America. The keywords there, until the arrival of troops from America. Let's listen to that later, okay? And of course, when they installed the monument, it was attributed to the citizens of San Francisco to commemorate the victory of the American Navy under Commodore Dewey at Manila Bay. So this was on May 23rd. That was when it was groundbreaking. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, the answer to the question was in 2019, if you see the black on the base on the west side, there's now a new marker, the Battle of Manila Bay and the Philippine War. It means it's not only what was written on the four sides of the monument, but there's now a Filipino version or context of the historical event being commemorated on the Dewey Monument. We will discuss this text later. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. When the Union Square was being constructed, I was already involved in history and also in the community. So when we saw that they're designing the Union Square, so I was involved in asking the contractor if they can include a marker wherein we can put our version of history in the construction. That's why I wrote this one during the time I was a columnist, and the title of my column is Ethnotourism. The topic is reconstructing our history in Union Square. Because as a historian migrating in the United States, I find this one very, very important. So that's why I was involved in asking people how we can contribute in the writing of history in the United States. And then Fortunately, during the time, there is the civic the public arts department of the Arts Commission. So therefore, they were thinking of also trying to put a reinterpretation of the mural. And we talked with the director, Deborah Lane, and then he mentioned that this is not our first time. There is an inspiration that we can start on. Next slide. Oh, okay. The inspiration was the Pioneer Monument. If you see the Pioneer Monument, you have the Native American down, and you have the missionaries or Spanish priests scolding them. But then there's important point, because if you read the California Native American version of the Pioneer Monument, the Pioneer Monument, created in 1894, represents a conventional attitude of the 19th century. It commemorates the settlement of California by Western civilization. This plaque, added in 1996, seeks to acknowledge the effect of this settlement of the California Native Americans. At least 300,000 Native people, perhaps far more, lived in California at the time of the European settlement in 1769. During the contact with colonizers from Europe and the United States, the native population of California was devastated by disease, malnutrition, and armed attack, and the most dramatic decline of the native population occurred in the year following the discovery of gold in 1848. So when I learned about this one, oh, there's a version from the Native Americans. Perhaps, so one fellow columnist, Rodel Rodis, started also explaining to the people, oh, we have a role to play in San Francisco if we can encourage the city officials and also those who are responsible in public arts to add our version of history. So that was the next one. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, and then I started reading more books, and one of the most influential book is by Gray Brechin of the Imperial San Francisco, and of course the Forbidden Book. But lately I discovered another book which I recommend, How to Hide an Empire. And then I said to myself, oh, they hide the empire to us. Perhaps it's about time to unhide this empire. Because as they say in history, it's always written by victors. Not only they hide through history from their own people, like the American people, but also from the dominated and colonial subjects, the Filipino people. Next slide, please. So therefore, if we're trying to appreciate those monuments and markers, we're also engaging in what they call the discourse to memorialize the accuracy of the Philippine-American War and independence. There should be a continuing discourse on the history of the United States and its role in most parts of the world, then and now. Next slide. Okay, if you see most of the publication during that period, they have this Uncle Sam's Little Wars, Spanish-American War, Philippine Insurrection, the Boxer Rebellion, and then, is this really the Little Wars? Let's see the next slide. Okay, if you get the statistics or the facts and figure, the Philippine-American War from 1899 to 1913, the location is the Philippines. The result was the continued US annexation of the Philippines. The number of combatants involved, the US 126,000 soldiers. Of course, the Philippine unknown, but the casualties, there are 4,324 American soldiers killed, 2,818 wounded, and 2,000 killed, dead and wounded of the Philippine Constabulary. See the other figures. Filipino, 16,000 soldiers killed, 250,000 to 1 million civilians were killed. So almost a million Filipinos were directly or indirectly killed by this Philippine-American War during this period, 1899 to 1913. Let's see how the monuments and statues and marker explain this one. Okay, let's go. Next slide. Okay, so our point 2 place, we need to go to the California Volunteers Monument. Okay, this is located in Dolores and Market, and this is the monument. But then, if you see the California State Military Museum, they themselves admit that one of the most overlooked events in the annals of California's military history is the American occupation of the Philippines. The war in the Philippines, commonly referred to as the Spanish-American War, continued long after Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States. The Philippine insurrection which followed was the bloodiest and most brutal guerrilla conflict the United States fought prior to Vietnam. So the first Vietnam actually is the Philippines, and nobody knew that. And then as we go further, of course, they use the term occupation rather than American colonization. So that's also a difference. Okay, let's move to the next one. Okay, so the Spanish-American War, Philippine War, if you see the confusion was that everybody, when a veteran participated in the war, when they get their checks or when they request for their checks, especially the relatives of this veteran, they cannot identify the war because they usually put Philippine War, but then there was no response to their request. Why? Because according to this, in the pension, to be filed correctly, it should be paid out of the Spanish-American War Pension Fund. It means the United States never declared war to the Philippines because it doesn't recognize it as a country. So therefore, there's no fund related to that. But if you died or you were killed or you were wounded in the after the Spanish-American War, which was only 8 months, then the pension will be Spanish-American War still because the fund is from the Spanish-American War Fund. So that's why when you go to the tomb of died soldiers, you will see Spanish-American War veteran. They never put Philippine-American War. So therefore, it's different. And at the same time, the Spanish-American War is only a short period of time. And also, Spanish-American War is a global war, but the Philippine-American War is local. It's only the Philippines and the United States. So just imagine if you're a veteran, you were enthusiastic out of patriotism to fight for your country because you believe in the freedom of democracy and independence because you fought a colonizer during your history of your nationhood like the United States of America. The situation is different when you see the people you're fighting against are also people fighting for their independence. So you are fighting on the side of against colonizers, but you are actually colonizing. So that's the challenge. So the basic difference of the Spanish-American War and the Philippine War is that context. Okay, next slide, please. But the question, are the Philippine or the public understand this one? So therefore, the discourse is on the naming of the war. So the veterans were confused because it was Spanish-American War, and then they agreed just to get the fun. Okay, it's a Spanish-American War, but it's from 1899 to 1913. It's not a Spanish. That was not a Spanish-American War. It should be a Philippine War, but they mention it's Philippine insurrection, and the people are called insurrectors. Okay, so unfortunately, if there's this kind of naming of the war, it took 100 years before the the Library of Congress Cataloging Policy Support Office changed it from Philippine insurrection to Philippine War. So that's also the difference. And also, if you see the term, we never heard the word American Empire. We're familiar with British Empire, Spanish Empire, French Empire. The United States were never mentioned as US Empire or American Empire. That's another discourse. Okay, next slide. So when I did the research on the naming of or changing the Philippine insurrection to Philippine War, this is the email I got from the discussion. When did the Library of Congress change their entry of Philippine insurrection materials into Philippine-American War? Can you provide me the document, resolution, or memo that this is so? The subject heading changed to Philippine-American War was made at the Cataloging Policy Support Office editorial meeting on March 25, 1998, and appear on subject headings weekly list 1813. The 2004 edition of the Library of Congress subject heading, of which your local library should have a copy, shows the new subject heading on page something like that. So if you see this one, they canceled the history insurrection indexing into the Philippine American War. So that's the new approach now. But how do we know that the other agency are following what the Library of Congress is doing? Let's move to the next one. Okay. The next point 3 is the best place to tour you is the beautiful procedure. If you're familiar in the Philippines of the Camp John Hay, I can always relate in Baguio, Camp John Hay and the procedure. But what is amazing as this one, if you go to their museum, it says procedure is the major staging point for regular army troops headed to the Philippine-American War. But then look at the marker. Formally established of September 17, 1776, the San Francisco Presidio has been administered successively as a military headquarters by Spain, Mexico, and the United States. A major command post during the Mexican War, Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I and II, and the Korean War, it remains a symbol of United States authority in the Pacific. Do you see the missing thing? They never mentioned Philippine-American War. They never mentioned Philippine insurrection even. So it was erased. It wasn't erased, it was hide. So it was intentionally not to be placed there. And this is California Registered Historical Landmark number 79. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, if you go to procedure, you will see the Ordonious Cannon. And the Ordonious Cannon were displayed there because they were war prize from the Philippines. It's still in the inscription says, Filipino nationalists were known as insurrectors by occupying Americans. See, it's still insurrectors. So the procedure are doing this one, but they're not giving the right terminology. Okay, next slide, please. But at least in procedure, you can learn because they're describing the war. Like here, war in the Philippines, the Spanish-American War, the Philippine War, and the procedure 1898 and 1902. So it described this war, and then they mention, note that after the war against Spain ended, United States leaders decided to give Cuba its independence, but keep the Philippines. In 1899, this led to the fight against Philippine insurrectors who wanted their independence. So that's another narrative that Filipinos should also understand. Okay, next. Next slide. And now the markers where I enjoy bringing people in procedure and read those markers and then explain to them. Now they also disappeared. They removed them. Sorry for the inconvenience, but then until now, I haven't seen them. They even removed this panel stand. Okay, next. But why in the world we have a President William McKinley Monument in San Francisco? Is it because he had a dream to civilize Filipino as part of the US Manifest Destiny and benevolent assimilation? When Commodore Dewey went to the Philippines or ready to go to the Philippines, McKinley don't even know where the Philippines is. So you need to ask people. So, and then when the war ended, he didn't know that they were successful. So he was towing the idea, what will we handle to these people, something like that. And then of course, the story, he had a dream. This is not Martin Luther King, but he had a dream. But the dream is to civilize the Filipino as part of the US Manifest Destiny and benevolent assimilation. Next slide. And then you have also General Pershing, which in the statue is to honor his role in the World War I in Europe, but they never discuss his role in the Moroland. If you see the chronology of the war, it's from 1899 to 1913. And Pershing was the governor of the Moro province. And that's another story that we need to explain, because even Trump used Pershing in 2016 campaign, that he said that if there are 50 Muslim, he got, Pershing got 49 captors, Muslim, and then killed them with the bullet with pig's blood, something like that. But then the people, the Muslim or the Moros in the Philippines, they're not terrorists. They're fighting for their land. That's their land. Okay, again, that's another story. Next slide. But then, why do San Francisco has a statue of an unknown Chaplain McKinnon at Golden Gate Park? Nobody knew this person, but let's go to the next slide. Next slide. So now this is the reason. The Dewey Memorial Tower in Union Square commemorates the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898 that made America an imperial power in Asia and Pacific. So remember I mentioned in the Union Square that they're waiting for the arrival of America. So the Battle of Manila Bay, there are two. The one that Dewey started, which is April 30 and May 1st. The other one is the August 13, where the Spaniards surrendered to the America, although the Filipino revolutionary were about to overwhelm them. So the Spaniards, instead of surrendering to their former colonies that they surrendered to the American. And the American didn't want us to be part of that victory. So they segregated us with them. Okay, next. And the cities, San Francisco, go back please. Go back to that slide. And San Francisco the war, the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War brought prosperity to local economy. It is considered the second gold rush. Means say San Francisco became rich again, or the prosperity. That's why they initiated the City Beautiful movement, and that's why they put more monuments in the city. That's why when you see the different monuments and statues connected to the war in the Philippines, it's because of the prosperity it brought to the San Francisco. Okay, but for Filipinos, it meant 600 deaths and loss of independence and freedom. And the Philippines became a US colony. Again, they seldom use the term colony. That's why when we go to the United States, the first Filipino in the 1920s, they're called US nationals. We don't have the benefit as a US citizen or the Bill of Rights of US citizen. So we're separated as if we are also from Asia. We can be included in the Exclusion Act of the Chinese. Next slide. Okay, it is a Philippine-American War. So it's from 1898 to 1913 and beyond. And you see the different markers, it's always say Spanish-American War. Okay, next slide. So the good thing about San Francisco, why I love the city and I love touring the people in San Francisco, because San Francisco is the Filipino Smithsonian. There are many historical landmarks and cultural spaces connected to the Philippines and the Filipinos in America. Next slide. The Philippines and the United States are connected by history of wars, nation building, and global positioning. Next slide. Okay, I mentioned the marker in the Ordonious Gun in Presidio. They mentioned the Ordonious Gun in San Francisco. It was placed at the Columbia Square Park, surrounded by refugees from the 1906 earthquake. That's the picture in the marker or in the panel. But that was the Columbia Square Park, which became the Bessie Carmichael School, and later became to a park again as Victoria Manalo Draves Park. And Victoria Manalo Draves Park was born in South of Market. He was a two-time Olympic champion, 2 gold medal in diving, and we named the park to her. That's Victoria Manalo Draves Park. That's why South of Market is connected to the Philippine-American War, because the cannon was located there, and the children were using it as part of their playground in the school. In 1972, they decided to move the cannon to the present site in Presidio. Next slide. So San Francisco has monument markers, street names, and public arts to prompt us to revisit and retell her history. So this is the beauty why I'm doing tours in San Francisco, either a walking tour or a city tour wherein you will see the Philippine-American history and the connection to the Philippine-American War. Next slide. And now this one, America came to the Philippines because of that war, yeah? And US dominated most parts of the world. And then the Filipinos came to America, and Filipinos work in many parts of the world. So that's the connection. Okay, next slide. The meaning why I promote and propose continuing discourse, this is for Filipinos, Filipino Americans, and American people. This is from the quotation from Pablo Neruda. Whoever discovers the who of me will find out who of you, and why and where. Next slide. Okay, this is my presentation in 2005 and also now. The continuing discourse, I entitled it Di Mapawi, In Di Mapawi in Tagalog, it means it won't be erased, remove, or eradicate. It is our task to unlearn and learn our own history from our point of view as Filipinos. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer it. Thank you very much. And next time you're in San Francisco, I'm more than happy to share to you those sites and other stories.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Kuya MC. So we do have a question here from Carolyn Seitko. Do we know why or what were the motivations for the Presidio marketplacers to not recognize the Filipino-American War?
I don't know. I'm not. I don't know the inside story there, but I was telling the people there because the markers that were removed in the Ordonious Gun, for me, those are important. Even if they put the parentheses insurrectos, it is still important because I can always explain why they use the insurrecto. But until now, I don't know why they're still there. They're still not installed those markers. And also the main marker, which did not mention the Philippine-American War, is still there.
Yeah, I was wondering because you did show that picture of the description of the wars from Presidio. When did you take that picture? When were they taken down? How long have they been down?
Perhaps around 4 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have no. Oh, go ahead.
There's a exhibit in the Presidio before this pandemic happened, and then I took that picture. They're using Philippine-American War in the thing. But again, the date. Another discourse is the date, because they put 1902. Roosevelt ended the war. You didn't declare the war. You end the war. And the war extended up to 1913 because they went back to southern Philippines, because most of the war in the beginning were more Luzon. And then in 1899, there's the Philippine-American War because 3 Filipino soldiers were killed by Americans, and then it sparked and it became the war. And then the Treaty of Paris in December, that was right after the Treaty of Paris. That's the next year, February 4, it was the war, which is the Philippine-American War. And of course, the debate then was the American people were divided. I thought we don't want an empire. How come we're there, right? So it's a republic.
Like a lot of ambiguity.
I thought America is a republic and we support Republican people wanting their own independence and sovereign, but then you're still there. So they removed the term, and that's why most of the part of us, they're U.S. territories. They call that Philippine Islands. It's just like Hawaii later, just like the Puerto Rico became Commonwealth. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just like a very.
So they hide the empire. That's why I said the book was important.
Yeah, like the naming convention is really taking a key role in how it's being perceived. We have also another couple questions that are very similar. This one's from Nicole. What other Filipino figures can we memorialize in Golden Gate Park or in San Francisco to make representation more equitable?
What do you mean equitable?
Just to make our true history more visible, and that it shows the side of our experiences versus like the side of the empire experience.
Actually, when the beauty about this campaign of retelling our story, it's also connected to community organizing. Because when, for example, when you see the South of Market, you have many landmarks in South of Market. There are street names: Rizal, Mabini, Bonifacio, Tandangsora, Lapu-Lapu, no, in South of Market. The same time in the north side, you have the Lawton Street, you have the Funston Street, you have the Otis Street, you have the Harrison Street. So you have many streets that commemorating the Spanish-American War, Philippine-American War. And then Rizal, our foremost national hero, is on the Palace Hotel, and the marker is there that explain that the first visit of U.S. of Rizal in the United States is in the Palace Hotel. So, and then the SOMA Pilipinas, the Social Heritage District, is in south of Market. And you see my history, north of Market represent the annexation of the Philippines or the colonization of the Philippines. And the south of Market is a representation of the coming of the Filipinos.
This question comes from Lisa Ruth, and I know you had mentioned there's already kind of like an addendum plaque that has been added to the McKinley statue, or the Dewey Monument, sorry. But the question is, given the current new attention to statues and their origins, do you have any plans to add more interpretive plaques to some of the existing sites you mentioned?
Actually, I was involved in the initial designing of the plaque, but in the final installation, I was not part. When I read the marker in the thing, it shows, like what I said, Filipinos themselves don't know their history, that they're also following the line of their dominant, powerful country like the United States. Because if you go back to their thing, can you go back to the slides where it says the marker?
Let me try to pull that up.
Because I was surprised when, for this lecture or presentation, I saw, no, it's the, I think the third. In the beginning, the one in the beginning. Some more on the first. Yeah, okay. You see this is a Filipino written with American mind. The Filipino people of the Philippines struggled against Spanish colonial rule for over 300 years. At the outbreak of the Spanish-American Wars, Filipinos joined with American forces and rejoiced in Commodore Dewey's decisive defeat of the archipelago. Filipinos joined the American forces. We're fighting the Spaniards before the American came. We didn't join them. So that's when I said, oh, if you see the mural, go back to the next one. The next slide after this one. Okay, the next one after this one. The wording of the plaque. The next one. Oops, it's okay.
Sorry, which slide do you need?
The one with the Rodel Rodis, or go back to the one with the Pioneers Monument.
There you go.
Okay, you see the Pioneers Monument. They mention about the mood of that period, right? So they recognize that this was made because of that feeling or the sentiment during that period, the pioneers. So when the Arts Commission director of Civic Arts mentioned, he started creating a draft. Citizens of San Francisco erected the Dewey Monument in 1901 as a response to national and local patriotism. The United States had defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War, okay? Although the war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1898, Within months, a new conflict began, the Philippine-American War. The war lasted about 3.5 years, while over conflict lasted approximately 10 years. As many as, see, the draft of the Arts Commission director was even sympathetic to us than the one in the marker. Because if you see the marker, they're trying, because even the Philippine independence, the United States did not recognize the Philippine independence, because when Aguinaldo declared the independence, he said, under the protection of the powerful and humanitarian nation, the United States of America, we do hereby proclaim and declare solemnly in the name of, by authority of the people of the Philippine Islands, that they are and have the right to be free and independent. Meaning to say that our general who attributed to the Philippine independence attributed the Declaration of Independence with the support of the great nation. Again, they hide, we call British Empire, right? But America is using the term great nation. That's why my term for MAGA, which is make America great again, they want to make America a great nation. It means American empire. That's the point. That's why when I see the article on the how to hide an empire, if you're talking of Black Lives Matter, it also involves those who are in the former colonies, continuing territories, because those are the other issue that are not properly discussed in the discourse of the social justice campaign by the people in the mainland. Because we're always in the margin, we're always not properly understood.
Right. And, you know, I think this answers a question that came up about, and I believe this is someone maybe perhaps playing devil's advocate about if we would have preferred to remain under Spanish dominion. What a lot of people don't understand is the length of history that the Philippines had been under colonial rule by different countries, not just Spain, not just America. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
No, at the turn of the century, or before the turn of the century, Spain is already a declining empire. And the United States knows that because it's a late bloomer empire. So that's why the Spanish-American War was the triggering point so that they can go to Asia. So I mean, say the United States is really intending to get into the, because there's what they call the Alfred Mahan Doctrine. If you don't control Pacific, other countries will take over. So America is conscious of that. So they take Hawaii, and then they take Guam, and then they take us. But the Spanish-American War, by the way, they purchased the Spanish-American War ended with a treaty, and it's $20 million buying the Philippines.
Yeah, and Puerto Rico was also a part of that.
Right. That's right. And
There's
Cuba got their independence. We didn't get ours, and later Puerto Rico became Commonwealth.
There was a comment from Charmaine. No, that's why we fought them. We wanted independence, but it's trading independence from one occupier to another in a way. There's also a question here from Liberato Ramos. The Pioneer Monument was removed 2 years ago. Was the marker removed too? And then the second question is trivia, matter of dates, Philippine time. Example, May 1st, when Dewey defeated the Spanish Armada when the US was still sleeping. Do you want to speak to either of those comments, Kuya?
No, the Spanish fleet were defeated because they're not ready. They're even afraid because they know the mighty American warship. And the question of Liberato, unfortunately, the civic center where the Pioneers Monument is located is now an encampment or tent for homeless because of the COVID situation. So personally, I was not able to look into it when I'm preparing this presentation. But definitely the Junipero Serra and the native were removed. I wonder whether they remove also the marker. But for me, that's unfortunate because nobody now knows that there are 300,000 Native American prairies during that pioneer settlement in California. That's why I'm more into reinterpreting markers rather than removing them because nobody will explain them. It's just another erasure.
Yeah, well, we've had this conversation before about counterpoint, that there is many sides to a story, and the ability to have the same amount of real estate or the shared space to be able to create the dialogue on those very many sides is at least what could be asked for of communities that aren't being represented. Let's see, here's a comment from Charmaine. Filipino soldiers had already encircled Manila. The American soldiers basically muscled in and robbed the Filipinos of their victory. I'd heard the same retelling as well. Another question, how can we support and engage our organization? So I put in the chat box a link to SOMA Pilipinas' website. You can always donate. You can learn more about the work that we're doing and the many organizations that work within SOMA Pilipinas that are serving our community. And specifically to a lot of these like placemaking efforts that we're working on through our NEA strategy. We have been working with a lot of San Francisco and Bay Area based Filipino artists, designers, architects, and community through community design charrettes and workshops to really envision what we would like our neighborhood to look like and how it could reflect our truths and our histories. So you can learn more about that at our website. And are there any other questions? I think that's about it. I don't see anything else coming up. We want to thank San Francisco History Days for having SOMA Pilipinas San Francisco Cultural Heritage District. And we really wish all of you safety, clean air, and the ability to stay cool and hydrated and healthy. Thank you.
And visit San Francisco when it's ready, and then we can see the tour and we can feel the real history in San Francisco.
Yes, thank you so much, Kuya MC, for your presentation, and Lisa Ruth for supporting us in this.
Great, thanks, MC. We look forward to joining you and walking through space together when we can all do that safely. I'm first on your list, so please put me down. Let me know. But stay tuned to what SOMA Pilipinas is doing through the links that were posted. Also, we just put a couple links from the San Francisco History Days page. We have 2 more programs this afternoon, and so we hope you can join us for one of those. And of course, the online exhibitions space on that website is going to exist throughout the next year. We really were sort of forced into this format, but we're glad that you all could join us here today in this virtual way to celebrate San Francisco history and talk about and debate how that's actually something we learn, something we participate in, something that we can also challenge. So thanks so much. And this will be, as you know, recorded, so it will be available on the San Francisco History Days YouTube channel at a later date, and it can be seen whenever you want to return to this immense amount of information you've pulled together, MC. There's a lot to follow up on and kind of reinforce. So thanks so much, and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.